How often do you go out and interact with people face to face? Daily? Weekly? Few times a week? Monthly? Few times a month? Or are you someone who is avoiding social contacts, face-to-face contacts? Are you doing that only since fear has been drilled into you since March 2020? Or have you always been like that? I'm asking those questions because in today's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind, we're looking at a topic that touches many of us. Yet we often feel we must face it alone. And that topic is loneliness. It's more than just being by yourself because it's a profound, sometimes painful psychological state that can have a serious impact on our general well-being and our health. And although we seem to be closer connected with everyone everywhere on a global scale nowadays, with all the digital developments, there seems to be a rise in loneliness. So in this episode, we explore the effects of loneliness on a physical and mental level, but we also have a look at loneliness across the world and other aspects of that. Let's start the episode by looking at the modern paradox of loneliness. Think about your last few minutes online. You've probably seen friends' life updates. You may have liked photos, or you scrolled through endless feeds, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, the super addictive TikTok, just to mention a few of them. There's far more, but that's kind of the main ones that I keep using. Oh, YouTube, yes. Maybe YouTube I should mention as well in that line of social media. We may have thousands of friends or followers, instant messaging and video calls that bridge geographical divides. But despite this vast digital web of connection, studies from organizations like the Pew Research Center and Cigna have shown a significant increase in self-reported feelings of loneliness, especially amongst the younger generation. And this raises a crucial question. Are we mistaking digital connection for genuine social connection? That's a question I put forward to you listeners as well. Do you think a digital connection is the same as a genuine social connection? Is digital connection different for you than a normal social connection which includes face-to-face? Many psychologists argue that while social media provides a platform for visibility and communication, it often lacks the depth and authenticity of face-to-face interaction. And I have to agree with psychologists on that one. I don't know about you, but I certainly do. The curated and often idealized lives we see online can lead to social comparison and feelings of inadequacy. And that would further fuel the sense that we are, or that we may be, the only one struggling. There is this keeping up with the Joneses thing, always showing the happy images, all the happy holiday pictures, and what is underneath? Is there really a connection? Very often people portray themselves as someone or something that they are not, which is inauthentic, but it is part of wanting to attract attention. So this surface level interaction that can amplify rather than alleviate the feeling of being truly alone. And even if we think it's just the Western world that has this problem, this increase in loneliness, it's actually not just the Western world. So here is a breakdown of how loneliness looks different around the world. While the loneliness epidemic is a phrase often used by Western media, data shows that loneliness is a truly global issue. For instance, recent surveys have found the following. Africa has been identified as a continent with high loneliness rates, particularly among adolescents. One report noted a pooled prevalence of 24% of people in Africa feeling lonely, a rate higher than in Europe. Other regions like the Eastern Mediterranean and Southeast Asia also report significant rates of loneliness. So for the Eastern Mediterranean, it would be 21%, and Southeast Asia is 18%. The lowest rates have been consistently observed in Northern European countries, which challenges the idea that Western nations are universally the loneliest. And a global survey by the Gallup Institute found that 23% of people worldwide reported feeling lonely a lot of the day yesterday, and that last bit was in quotes, as mentioned in that study. With high rates in countries like Brazil, 50%, Turkey, 46%, and India, 43%, and low rates in Vietnam, only 6%. So the data we've seen suggests that while loneliness is a significant issue in many Western countries, it is not an exclusive problem and, in fact, can be higher in other parts of the world. Next, let's look at some cultural differences that can play a role in if people feel lonely or not. So the next bit is about individualism versus collectivism. The key difference often lies in the cultural context of individualism versus collectivism, which influences how people define and experience loneliness. Let's compare them both. First, looking at the individualistic cultures in countries like the US, the UK, and some parts of Northern Europe. These cultures emphasize personal achievement, self-reliance, and individual choices. In these societies, loneliness is often tied to a lack of close friends or a romantic partner. People in those cultures are more likely to live alone and are expected to be more independent. The feeling of loneliness can be perceived as a personal failure to form connections, but also as a rational consequence of a lifestyle that values autonomy. Now let's compare that to the collectivist cultures, for example, in parts of Asia, Africa, or Latin America. These cultures prioritize the group, community, and family. Interdependence and fulfilling one's role within the family and community are highly valued. In those societies, loneliness can be more strongly linked to perceived failure to meet familial expectations or a lack of interaction with one's family. While there may be a lower rate of living alone, the feeling of not fitting in with the community or family can be a particularly painful form of loneliness. Research has found that in collectivist cultures, the absence of interaction with family members is more strongly associated with loneliness than in individualistic societies. And some other regional and cultural factors can include the urbanization and economic development of a society or culture. Rapid urbanization in many non-Western countries is disrupting traditional family and community structures. As people move from rural areas to cities for work, they often leave behind their close-knit family networks, which can lead to social isolation and loneliness. And then there's the perception of loneliness. In some cultures, admitting to feeling lonely carries a greater stigma. In cultures where social bonds are expected to be strong and familiar, admitting to loneliness can be seen as a sign of failure or as a character flaw, making it harder for people to seek help or support. This can lead to significant underreporting of loneliness, even if the feeling is widespread. And then there's the angle of youth versus older adults. In many Western countries, studies consistently show that younger adults are the loneliest demographic, often attributed to the pressures of social media and life transition. However, in some non-Western societies, like some post-Soviet countries, older adults tend to report higher levels of loneliness. This is often linked to the decline of traditional family support systems and a lack of institutional care for the elderly. So to conclude this part, while the media narrative often centers on the Western world's loneliness epidemic, it is a complex and universal challenge. The real difference isn't necessarily whether loneliness exists, but how and why it is experienced and what specific cultural factors contribute to it in different parts of the world. Next, let's look at the effects of loneliness. There are studies, or one study at least, that sees loneliness as a major public health risk. And the most powerful statistic often cited comes from a meta-analysis by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad and her colleagues. Their research, published in journals like, for example, Perspectives on Psychological Science, found that the health risks of social isolation and chronic loneliness are comparable to those of well-known health threats. Chronic loneliness and social isolation are associated with a 26 to 29% increase in the risk of premature death. Some studies have shown that a lack of social connection is a greater public health hazard than obesity. And the risk of premature death from social isolation is often equated to the risk of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This powerful comparison emphasizes that loneliness isn't just a feeling, but a physiological stressor with concrete, deadly consequences. Let's look at the physical health effects. The feeling of loneliness isn't just an emotional state, it's a physiological one. Research has shown that chronic loneliness can be as detrimental to your physical health as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, as mentioned before. It is a very bold claim, but it is backed by a growing body of research. The stress of loneliness elevates cortisol levels, a hormone linked to inflammation, increased risk of heart disease, and a weakened immune system. And the effects on cardiovascular health are that research from sources like the Heart Journal and the American Heart Association has linked loneliness to an increased risk of heart disease and stroke. Chronic loneliness can lead to elevated blood pressure, increased levels of the stress hormone cortisol, as we already heard, and higher levels of inflammation, all of which are major risk factors for cardiovascular problems. And the effect on the immune system is that a chronically lonely person's immune system is often weaker and less effective. Studies have shown that loneliness can impact the body's ability to fight off infections and illnesses, making individuals more susceptible to viruses. How about dementia and cognitive decline? I would actually have put those in a more psychological and neurological section, but never mind. A study published in the Journal of Gerontology, Psychological Sciences, found that lonely individuals have a 40% increased risk of developing dementia. Loneliness can accelerate cognitive decline, affecting brain function in areas related to memory, attention, and executive function. It should have been in the psychological section, but it's a nice segue in a way. But to summarize the physical effects, loneliness takes a significant toll on the body's systems, primarily through the chronic activation of the stress response, which leads to those higher cortisol levels. So beyond the physical health, loneliness directly impacts the brain and a mental state, often creating a self-perpetuating cycle. First, there is a heightened threat detection. From a neurological perspective, loneliness has a direct impact on our brains. It affects areas related to social connection and threat detection. For example, studies using the MRI scanners have shown that lonely individuals exhibit heightened activity in the amygdala, the internal warning system, as I call it, the part of the brain responsible for the fight or flight response. This hypervigilance makes lonely people more likely to perceive social situations as threatening, even when they are not. This creates a vicious cycle. You feel lonely, your brain is on high alert for social threats, which makes you more withdrawn and less likely to seek out the very connections you crave. Loneliness dulls the brain's reward system, making it harder to experience pleasure from social interactions, which only reinforces the isolation. Loneliness also contributes to mental health disorders. Loneliness is a significant risk factor for depression and anxiety. Research estimates that a large percentage of people experiencing chronic loneliness also experience mental distress. It can lead to rumination, a tendency to reread negative social interactions in the mind, which can contribute to depression symptoms. Loneliness is also strongly linked to poor sleep quality and insomnia. The hypervigilance and stress caused by loneliness make it difficult for the body and mind to relax, leading to disrupted sleep patterns. Findings like those mentioned from institutions such as the American Psychological Association and the World Health Organization underscore that loneliness is not merely a subjective experience, but a serious, measurable risk factor for a whole range of long-term health problems. So how can we create a less lonely world? If loneliness is a complex problem rooted in both psychology and biology, how do we begin to solve it? How can we create a less lonely world? The solution isn't just to simply get out more or make more friends. It requires a far more deliberate and multifaceted approach. First, we need to distinguish between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is a choice, a time for reflection and rejuvenation, a time to relax, to step back from everyday life, from work, to just have some peace, time for yourself. Self-care is not selfish. Loneliness, on the other hand, is a state of unwanted isolation. Embracing periods of healthy solitude can make social interactions more meaningful. Second, we must prioritize quality over quantity in our relationships. Cultivating a few deep, trusting friendships is far more powerful than having a large network of superficial acquaintances. And that can mean investing time and showing vulnerability to others, and when we spend time and share conversations with others. And on a broader scale, we can build a less lonely world by fostering a community. This could be as simple as starting to say hello to your neighbors, joining a local club, or volunteering for a case you care about. These actions create a sense of belonging and shared purpose. We also need to be more mindful of our digital habits, using social media as a tool for connection, but not as a substitute for it. Turning off notification, scheduling digital detoxes, and making an effort to meet online friends in person can all help. Note of caution, be careful with regards to online friends. Especially if you're in a vulnerable state, be careful with online friends, because there are people out there who want to exploit others, who don't have necessarily the best intentions. With regards to loneliness, the most important step is to acknowledge the pain of loneliness without shame. And when we are open about our struggles, we give other people permission to do the same. And in that shared vulnerability, we find the very thing we were looking for, which is genuine human connection. I add two personal tips with regards to making new connections, because I was one of these people to not being too keen on making new connections due to past experiences, any kind of negative experiences, beliefs, things like that. So I wasn't too keen on it. And when I started changing my perception, my outlook, I started to approach new people with curiosity, with interest in what can I learn from them, what is their story, because we all have our stories, we all have our good days and bad days, and it's all not just plain sailing. Yes, it may not be easy to put past bad experiences with people aside, but don't let it stop you from making new connections. I would be a bit more careful with the online ones initially. There are some people that I have as online connections for many years, and I would love to meet them at some point. Some of them I have met, and just find a way which is best for you to make more connections. Joining a club or joining a hobby, starting a hobby where you can meet with other people, that's probably the best idea. And the second tip goes back to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, it's not just something for business, it's really a life skill. And the most important thing of that is become self-aware, learn to self-manage yourself, your reactions, your behaviors, and then build up with the social awareness and the social skills. Go back to episodes 13 and 14 of Exploring Brain and Mind about emotional intelligence, because what you pick up from those episodes isn't just important for business, it's important for connections and for living a more fulfilling and happier life in general. And this brings us to the end of our episode today. Like and share the episode with people who might benefit from it. Follow and subscribe to the podcast, Exploring Brain and Mind, on Apple, on Spotify, Amazon Music and YouTube. And tune in again to one of the next episodes. Thank you for listening.